Hello and welcome to Nithrania Game Club. My name is Branislav Berec and you're watching Game in a Nutshell, the series of videos designed for explaining the board game rules. Today we're going to learn how to play Imperial Struggle, which is a spiritual successor to Twilight Struggle. The game is designed by Ananda Gupta and published by GMT Games, and if you are familiar with Twilight Struggle, Imperial Struggle and Twilight Struggle have a lot of similarities. However, there are many differences as well, so let's get started. To set the game up, shuffle the event decks separately, and then place this succession deck face down on this draw pile area. Then shuffle these investment tiles and place them face down in this investment tiles deck area. Each player takes a player mat, then shuffle these basic war tiles, these small hexagonal tokens with this specific back, and place them face down in this basic war tiles area, and randomly take 4 of these tiles, and place 1 in each theater of this War of the Spanish Succession display, again randomly. You may inspect your own tiles, but you may not look at the opponent's tiles. Then shuffle these bonus war tiles and place them in this area on your player mat. And make sure you use these WSS, the War of the Spanish Succession bonus war tiles. French player, and only the French player, can take 1 of these bonus war tiles and place it in this Central European theater. British player doesn't place any bonus war tiles at the start of the game. Then place flags on the map. Each red space will contain a British flag, each blue space will contain a French flag. Place 1 French squadron, that's this hexagonal tile, and 2 British squadrons in this navy box, and place all the remaining unbuilt squadrons in this space on your player mat. Now place the victory point marker on the 15th space on the scoring track, death limit markers of both players on number 6, current death limit marker on the 0 space, and the treaty point markers on the 0 space as well. Place this game turn marker on the first space of the turn track, and the initiative marker in this area, French side up. Now these pentagonal spaces are designated for advantage tiles. So find the corresponding advantage tiles and place them face up on these spaces on the entire map. Now since these 2 advantage tiles are the only tiles in the game, where all the neighboring spaces, in this case only 1 space, is controlled by 1 of the players, those 2 tiles are controlled by those players from the start of the game. So take this advantage tile and place it on the French player mat, and since this tile is controlled by British player, it will be placed on the British player mat. And finally, take these 8 award tiles and 6 global demand tiles, shuffle them and randomly choose 3 global demand tiles and place them face up next to this global demand table, and then take 4 random award tiles and place 1 of them face up in these award spaces in all 4 regions on the map. With that, you're ready to start the game. The game takes place over 6 turns. They are called peace turns, and they are interrupted by these 4 wars. First 2 turns of the game are called the succession era. It's marked with this white color. The second 2 turns are called the empire era, and the last 2 turns are called the revolution era. The rules state that each peace turn has 14 phases. But let me simplify that a little bit. I would say that it only has 3 phases, and it has 14 steps. I call the first phase as a pre-action phase. It's a pure administration phase. Players make almost no decision except for this 7th step, where players may choose some of their ministry cards for the turn. Then there is an action phase, where the game is actually played. This is where players make all the decisions, they place their own flags on the map, they remove opponents' flags, they prepare for the upcoming war by placing the bonus war tiles to these theaters, and they do it over 4 action rounds, and players alternate taking these rounds. Then there is another administration phase, which I call the post-action phase, which includes scoring and victory check. Then there may be a war turn. War turn is another administration phase. Players don't make any decisions, they made all the decisions during the action phase, and so all the war theaters will be resolved by flipping these war tiles face up. Players will calculate their strength. That strength may be further increased by these bonus areas in each theater, and the player with the higher strength wins the theater. Now let's talk briefly about how you win the game. The map depicts 4 regions: Europe, North America, Caribbean and India. North America is further divided by this dividing line into Canada and the northern colonies, and similarly south of this dividing line in India is the Carnatic coast, and this area is called Hooghly River. Each turn, each region will have 1 award tile assigned. To win that award in a region each turn, you have to have more flags and potentially squadrons in that region than your opponent. Furthermore, in Europe, there's always this prestige scoring, and the player having more flags in these prestige spaces, those are spaces with this green border and a crown icon, will be awarded with 2 victory points. Then players will also score victory points for the global demand. For each of these commodity tiles, the player controlling more of these spaces will get the reward shown in this table. If one player wins all regional awards and all global demand awards in one turn, that player automatically wins the game. Similarly, if one player wins all theaters by maximum margin during one turn, that player automatically wins the game. Otherwise, if during the victory check the score will exceed this 30 on the scoring track, the French player wins the game, and if the score is below 0, then the British player wins the game. And finally, at the end of the 6th turn, if neither player reached the automatic victory, the position of the scoring marker determines the winner. On the first turn of the game, most of the steps of the phase, which I call the pre-action phase, are skipped because they were part of the setup, so I will explain the entire pre-action phase later in the video. However, there are a few steps that both players need to do. First, you have to take 9 random investment tiles and place them in this available tiles area. Then each player will draw 3 event cards, which they obviously keep secret from the other player. Then in the next administration step, step number 7, players will take all their ministry cards and select 2 cards that match the current era. Those are cards with this S symbol in the left hand side of the card. After choosing the cards, place them face down in these spaces on your player mat. Ministry cards will only be turned face up when their abilities or keywords will be used. Finally, the step number 8 is about determining the initiative. On the first turn, the French player has the initiative, but that doesn't mean the French player will be the first to act during the action phase. Instead, the player who has the initiative will choose which player will be the first to act during the action phase. That player will be called a starting player, and now we can move to the action phase. During the action phase, players will alternate taking so-called action rounds, with the starting player acting first. Each player will complete 4 action rounds, and all actions from one action round must be fully completed before the next player starts their next action round. On your action round, you must select 1 investment tile and place your marker on that tile, and then you may either use its capabilities or pass. If you pass, you may reduce your debt by up to 2, but then you do nothing else for that round. With that, your action phase would not be over. In the next action round, you will still be able to choose an investment tile and use its capabilities. There are 3 types of actions listed on these investment tiles. These are economic actions, these are diplomatic actions, and these are military actions. The shape of these icons, round for economic, diamond for political, and hexagonal for the military, correspond to the types of spaces those actions can affect. Economic actions can affect these round markets, diplomatic actions affect these political spaces, and military actions affect forts and naval spaces. One of those actions is always listed as a major action with a large icon and a large number, and the other is listed as a minor action with a small icon and a small number. If the investment tile has this cross symbol, the event symbol, the player may play an event card from their hand. If the event card shows an action type, you must select the investment tile with that type of action as the major action in order to play that event if the tile has the event symbol. Playing the event card is optional, but if you do, you must fully resolve the event first, and then you may spend action points from the investment tile. So I will talk about the events first, and then I will explain all three major action types. Event cards recreate the historical events of the period. First of all, check the bonus condition. If it is satisfied now, at this moment, you get both the standard effect and the bonus effect. Otherwise, you can only perform the standard effect. Then play the standard effect first and then the bonus effect. You must fully resolve the effects even if you don't want to. If you receive any action points, like in this case, treat those action points as a separate major action. You can combine those action points with a major action from the investment tile, if they share the same type, of course. You can add them as a minor action, and you can treat it as a separate major action as well. Some bonus conditions only contain a keyword. To apply that bonus, you must have that keyword on one of your ministry cards. So if not revealed yet, you have to reveal that ministry card. Then you can apply the bonus effect as well. Some event cards have different effects for the British side and the French side. French player can only use the French effect, British player can only use the British effect. After resolving the event card, it's permanently removed from the game. The active player now resolves the selected investment tile. Large symbol with a large number is a major action, small symbol with a small number is a minor action. You can resolve these actions in any order. Before I explain the difference between the major and a minor action, let me first explain those three action types. These economic actions only affect economic spaces on the game board. Those are round spaces on the map and they're called markets. You can spend the economic action points to shift a market. Shifting a market means either placing a flag in an empty space or removing the opponent's flag from the market. Not both. Removing the opponent's flag from the space and immediately placing your own flag in the space in the same action round is called taking control of the space. To shift a market, it must be connected to a space you already control. So it must be connected to a territory, fort, or a naval space you already control, or to any market that you controlled at the start of your action round. So let's say the British player in this situation would like to shift this market, but they don't control any adjacent market. So they would not be allowed to shift this market and this one in the same action round. However, let's say a French player would place a squadron here. He would be allowed to shift this market space in the same action round. They would not be allowed to shift this market though, because that would be the market space daisy chaining. One last note, these conflict markers cancel out the adjacency. So even though the French player has a flag in this space, these two markets are not considered to be adjacent to this space. The cost of shifting the market is the value printed in its space. So to shift this market space, you would have to spend 2 economic action points. If the space would contain a conflict marker, the cost is reduced to just 1 economic action point. The same applies if the market space would be isolated, which means it's not adjacent to any other space that player controls. Again, the cost of shifting such space would be just 1 point. The cost of shifting the market can be increased by 1 if it's protected, which means it's connected to hexagonal spaces like forts or naval spaces. So in this case, the cost of shifting this market would be 4 economic action points. If the space contains a conflict marker, apply the reduction first, so reduce the cost to just 1 because of the conflict marker, and then increase it by 1 because of the protection from the fort, so the overall cost would be 2. The shifting cost can never be reduced below 1. You may use these diplomatic action points to shift political spaces. Political spaces are these diamond-shaped spaces. They don't require any connection to be shifted, and the cost for shifting the space is the same as for shifting the markets. Note that these two political spaces have this green background, and that means they become available at the start of the Empire era, at the start of the third turn. Similarly, this Sons of the Liberty space becomes available at the start of the Revolution era. Political spaces with this green border and the crown icon are prestige spaces. The player who controls more of these prestige spaces at the end of each turn will score 2 additional victory points. That includes these naval spaces, this territory, and also these political spaces when they become available. Political spaces marked with this alliance word may grant bonus strength during the wars. These small dots indicate that this political space will gain bonus strength during the first war, second war, and the third war, and this one also in the fourth war. Scotland only grants additional strength during the first war and the second war. There's one more thing you can do with the diplomatic action points. For 3 diplomatic action points, you can draw 1 event card. These are military action points, and you can use them in many ways. First, you can build forts. Forts are these hexagonal spaces without the anchor icon. Those are naval spaces. To build a fort, it must be connected to a space you controlled at the start of your action round. So, either a territory, market space, or a squadron, and it must be connected with this solid line. These dashed lines are only used during the wars. The cost of building the fort is printed in its space. The second option is to repair a fort. If the fort has this damage marker, if the opponent controls any adjacent space, he may be able to take control of that fort. So to prevent that, you have to repair the fort. The cost is the cost of building the fort minus 1, so in this case 2 military action points. When you repair the fort, return the damage marker back to the general supply. If you want to take control of the opponent's fort, you have to control a navy space or a market space adjacent to that fort, and you have to have that control at the start of your action round, and the fort must be damaged, otherwise you can't do that. Then you have to spend 1 military action point to remove that damage, and then pay the standard price to take control of that fort. You're not shifting the space, you immediately take control. Then you can spend 2 military action points to remove a conflict marker from a space you control. If the space would be protected, so connected to a hexagonal space you control like forts or naval spaces, then the cost of removing the conflict marker would only be 1 military action point. For 4 military action points, you can build a squadron. Place the newly built squadron in the navy box. You can have any number of squadrons in the navy box. Then the next action is deploying a squadron. You can deploy a squadron if you have it in a navy box or anywhere on the map. When you deploy a squadron to an empty naval space, you need to pay 1 military action point. If the navy space contains an enemy squadron, then if you deploy a squadron from anywhere on the map, the cost of deploying that squadron is 2 military action points and return the enemy squadron to the navy box. And if you deploy the squadron from the navy box and remove the enemy squadron, the cost of this action is 3 military action points. You can only deploy the same squadron 1 time per action round. So you would not be allowed to take the same squadron and deploy it again during the same action round. You may use the military action points to buy these bonus war tiles. You can buy maximum 2 bonus war tiles in the action round, and each costs 2 military action points. For each tile you purchase, take a random bonus war tile, look at that tile, and place it in one of the war theaters of the upcoming war. Each theater has a limit of maximum 2 bonus war tiles per player. If you would place a third tile in the same theater, you have to take one of those tiles and move it to another theater. On turn 6 only, since there is no next war, you can use the military action points to buy economic or diplomatic action points. The ratio is 2 to 1, and you may only buy economic or political actions. You may not buy both. Then you can use these points as a separate major action. Now that you know all the action types, let me explain the difference between the major action and the minor action. Major actions have no limitations. Minor actions can only be used for one expenditure. For example, shifting a single space or removing one conflict marker, purchasing one bonus war tile, and so on and so forth. If you would still have some minor action points available, if you already use them for one expenditure, you may not use it for another expenditure for another action. In addition, and this is very important, you may not use minor action to remove the opposing flag or a squadron. That can only be done with major action. The only exceptions are spaces with the conflict markers. Those may be removed even with a minor action. If you use the economic or diplomatic action points in more than one region on the map, let's say the French player wants to shift a market in North America and then the one in Caribbean, then for moving to another region, you have to pay one action point of the corresponding type, so in this case, one economic action point. If, in addition to North America and Caribbean, French player would decide to shift a market in India, they have to pay one additional action point for moving to another region. The same applies for diplomatic action points when shifting political spaces. Military action points are not affected by this rule. If you need to spend more action points than granted by the investment tile, either for the major action or for a minor action, you can take a debt. Each debt grants one action point of the corresponding type. You may take more than one debt during the same action round, but you may never exceed your debt limit. If you already reached your debt limit and you would be forced to take more debt, for each debt you are not able to take, lose one victory point instead. Some card effects refer to available debt. Available debt is the difference between your debt limit and your current debt. So French player has 3 available debt, British player has 4 available debt. Over the course of the game, you may acquire some treaty points. Each treaty point grants one action point of any type. Basically, it works just like that, but when you use treaty points, you move the marker towards the 0 space. If the investment tile has this military upgrade symbol, this kind of a recycle symbol, you may choose one basic war tile from the next war, and then randomly draw one basic war tile from your player mat, secretly look at both tiles, and then you may choose whether to replace the tile in play with the one you have just drawn. The tile not chosen is either completely removed from the game or returned back to your pool of basic war tiles. It's always a player's choice which option they would choose. Keep in mind that you may never end up with fewer than 4 basic war tiles, because you will always need one basic war tile to place in each theater. Again, in the 6th turn only, since there is no upcoming war, if you choose a tile with the military upgrade symbol, instead of that military upgrade, you can get 1 treaty point. Ministry cards enable some special abilities. You can play them during your action round or after the action phase, for the abilities like in this case, which take effect at the end of the turn. Ministry card is only turned face up if its ability or a keyword is actually used, or in the anticipation of doing so when it affects scoring, upcoming war, and so on and so forth. If the ministry card's ability can be used only once per turn, when using that ability, place the exhausted token on that ability. If the card has more such abilities, you can exhaust them at different points in time each turn. Ministry cards usually list one or more keywords, and event cards also list keywords as a bonus conditions. The bonus effect is only triggered when the player reveals or has already revealed a ministry card with the same keyword. These square spaces are territories, and they represent physical control of the land. They cannot change hands during the peace turn, only as a result of war. Territories serve as an anchor point for expansion in a region, and losing the territory may have devastating effects to a player's position in that region. After the action phase is over, it's time to resolve the steps of what I call the post-action phase. In the step number 10, if any player has more than 4 treaty points, reduce that down to 4. Then any powers that resolve at the end of the turn now resolve. If the ministry card with that ability would be still face down on your player mat, you may now flip it face up. Then perform scoring. Perform the award tile scoring, prestige scoring, and the global demand scoring. When scoring the award tiles, the player with more total flags and squadrons in that region will receive that region's award. Don't count the spaces with the conflict markers. In case of a tie, no reward is given. These are old award tiles in the game. These give you 0 victory points, but they give you 1 treaty point. This gives you 1 victory point and 1 treaty point. These simply give you 1 victory point, and these give you 2 and 3 victory points respectively. However, this red number 2 indicates that you must have at least 2 or more total flags and squadrons in a region than your opponent. So basically, you have to win by the margin of 2. Then the player controlling more prestige spaces, those are the spaces with this green border including Spain, Minorca, and these political spaces when they come into play, and also including these 2 naval spaces, will be awarded with 2 victory points. Again, don't count spaces with the conflict markers. Then score all global demand tiles that were drawn at the start of the turn. Then for each tile, the player controlling more market spaces with a corresponding commodity symbol, excluding the spaces with the conflict marker, gains the reward listed in the global demand table. Note that there are different rewards for the Succession era, Empire era, and the Revolution era. +1 TRP means that the winning player gets 1 treaty point, -1D means that a player loses 1 debt, and the +1D means that the opposing player has to take 1 debt. If the victory point score marker gets below 0 or exceeds 30 anytime during the game or during the scoring, unlike Twilight Struggle, it doesn't end the game immediately. Use some suitable components like flags or dice to keep the actual score below 0 or above 30, because the score may change and return below 30 or above 0. Only when you finish scoring and proceed to the step number 13, which is the step victory check, if the score would be 0 or less, the British player wins the game automatically, and similarly, if the score would be 30 or more, French player automatically wins. In addition, if one player wins all regional awards and all global demand rewards in the same turn, that player wins the game. If not, proceed to the next turn or next war. If this is the end of turn 6, the game ends, and you have to perform the final scoring. First of all, score the prestige spaces again, and the winner will get 2 victory points. Then, if any player has more available debt than the other player, the player with the more available debt will score 1 victory point for every 2 debt of difference, but maximum 4 points. Then score all 6 commodity markets. But this time, for each commodity where a player controls more markets than the opponent, that player gains 1 victory point. And finally, if you control a territory, this square space, that was controlled by your opponent at the start of the game, gain 2 victory points for each side space on the map. Then the victory point marker determines the winner. If the score is 16 or more, the French player wins the game. If the score is 14 or less, then British player wins the game. And if the score would be 15 exactly, the player with the more available debt wins the game. In case of a tie, British player wins the game because Britain won historically. If the peace turn is followed by war, the war is now resolved. Each war is made up of several theaters, 4 in this case. In each theater, players will add strength from their war tiles, then the bonus strength, and the player with the higher strength will take the spoils of war. So, in the theater order, each player will reveal the war tiles, both the basic and the bonus war tiles, in the active theater, and adds those values which determines the army's strength. So the French player has a strength of 3, British player has a strength of 2. Then apply the war tile effects, starting with the player who is closer to the automatic victory. This D, debt symbol, indicates that the opponent has to take one debt. This flag symbol with the cross allows the owner of that tile to unflag one market or political space without the conflict marker in a region matching that theater's region, so in this case it's Europe. When you choose to unflag a market in a valid region, you may not choose a market which would cause other markets to become isolated. You have to choose a different market. If you reveal a tile with this symbol, which is damage a fort or remove a squadron symbol, again, in the region shown in that war theater, you may either place a damage marker on the opposing fort or remove a squadron and return it back to the navy box. Then, after determining the army strength and applying the war tile effect, apply the bonus strength. Look at the bonus strength list of the current theater and add one bonus army strength for each flagged element. Basically, each country, and let's start with Austria, which has a flagged political space marked as alliance, grants one additional bonus strength. Again, don't count spaces with the conflict markers. So, in Austria, British player has one bonus strength, in Bavaria, French player has one bonus strength, and so on and so forth. If the theater shows a conflict markers on the bonus strength list, then the conflict marker grants one bonus strength to the opposing player, so in this case, the British player will get one additional bonus strength. If the list contains forts, players have to have undamaged forts in the region. If the list contains some keywords, you have to have those keywords on your ministry cards. Then it's time to calculate the total strength. Count up the values from your war tiles, then add the bonus strength, and the player with the higher strength wins the theater. Let's say the French player wins by 3 strength. They would receive 2 victory points and 1 CP, that's a conquest point, and the losing player, the British player, would receive 2 treaty points. In case of a tie, no one wins and no rewards are given. If you receive any conquest points as a spoils of war, it's a very powerful reward. You can conquest, take control of almost any space in the region except for the political spaces. Since Europe doesn't have any territories or naval spaces, let me show you how these conquest points can be used in North America. For one conquest point, you can simply take control of any fort or any market space. You don't have to control any adjacent spaces, you simply take control of that space. To take control of the naval space, you have to have a squadron in a navy box or in a region. Again, for one conquest point, simply take control of that naval space. To conquest a territory, it has to be in that region, or it has to be listed in the available territories of that particular theater. In this example, we have the Asiento territory on the list, and since it only costs one conquest point to take control of that territory, French player can immediately place a flag in that territory. If you want to take control of a territory in the region, again, let me show you an example in North America. Since there are no territories in Europe, you have to control a space linked to that territory with this conquest line. So if the British player would have a fort in Louisbourg, they would be able to conquer this territory or this territory. With one conquest point, they would be able to conquer one territory, but if they would receive 2 conquest points as a spoils of war, they would be able to conquer the second territory as well. On the other hand, French player can take control of this territory for 1 conquest point, because they control this fort. Now, the opponent can refuse to give up that territory. However, each player can only do this 2 times in the entire war. The conquest point would be spent anyway, and that territory cannot be taken again this war, but the first time you refuse to give up the territory during the war, you have to lose 3 victory points, and if you do it second time during the same war, you have to lose 5 victory points. Some theaters have special rewards based on who won. You can find their explanation as well as other symbols in the war theater in the rulebook. After resolving all theaters, if one player won all theaters with a maximum margin, that player automatically wins the game. So not just wins the theaters, but wins them with maximum margin. If not, check the victory points in the same way as you do during the peace turn. So if the score would be 30 points or more, French player wins the game. If the score would be 0 or less, British player wins the game. All players return all their war tiles back to their player mats. Remove all the conflict markers that granted bonus strength during the war. If they didn't, leave them in space, but if they did, they get removed. Remove the war display of the war which was just resolved, and place the display of the upcoming war on the table. In our example, it's the War of Austrian Succession. Again, each player randomly places one basic war tile in each theater, and if the war contains any special instructions, follow those instructions. At the start of turn 1 and 2, only the succession cards are in the event deck. At the start of turn 3, shuffle all the Empire era cards into the draw deck, and similarly at the start of turn 5, shuffle the Revolution era cards into the draw deck, and remove all the Succession era cards from the game. With one exception, ignore the discard pile, leave it as it is even with the Succession cards in. At the start of turn 1 and 2, player's maximum debt is 6. At the start of turn 3, increase the debt limit by 4. And at the start of turn 5, increase the debt limit by additional 4. There are 8 award tiles in the game. On the first turn of each era, so on turn 1, 3 and 5, shuffle all these 8 tiles together and randomly place 4 of those tiles face up in these award spaces, 1 in each region. On the second turn of each era, so on turn 2, 4 and 6, discard the tiles from the previous turn and randomly distribute the remaining 4 tiles. Again, place them face up, 1 tile per region. Unlike the award tiles, mix up all the global demand tiles each turn and randomly place 3 of them face up near this global demand table. That means the global demand tiles are fully randomized each turn. Then refresh all the advantage tiles and the ministry cards by removing the exhausted markers or flipping the tiles face up. Then move all 9 investment tiles from the available area to the used tiles area and return the turn markers back to the player's mat. Then randomly draw 9 new investment tiles, and if you wouldn't have enough tiles available in this area, reshuffle all the used tiles and create the new draw pool. Then each player would draw 3 event cards, and if you have any unused event cards from the previous turn, look at your cards and discard down to 3, but keep the card or cards you want to discard face down in front of you until both players made their choice, and then you can place them face up on the discard pile. If for some reason you wouldn't have enough event cards in the draw deck, reshuffle the discard pile. You can always inspect the discard pile anytime during the game. On the second turn of each era, if you have any ministry cards face down, any unused ministry cards, you can replace that card with any eligible card from your hand. Then on the first turn of each new era, in this example is the first turn of the Empire era, take back all your ministry cards, including the cards that are still face down, then select 2 from those that match the current era. So in this example, they have this green E symbol in the left hand side of the card, and place them face down on your player mat. And finally, determine the initiative for the turn. If the actual score is less than 15, then the French player would have the initiative, and if the score is more than 15, then the British player would have the initiative. Basically, the player who is currently losing takes the initiative. If the current score would be exactly 15, then the initiative marker remains as it was on the previous turn. Advantage tiles are these square tiles that were placed on these pentagon spaces at the start of the game. Each tile has a special ability, which players can use once per turn. If you take control of all the connected spaces of that advantage tile, take that tile and place it on your player mat in this area. You may not use that tile immediately. You can use it on your next action round at earliest or any time later during your action rounds. When you do, exhaust the tile. You can either flip it face down or you can place the exhausted marker on the tile. You can activate maximum 2 advantage tiles in your action round and maximum 1 per one region. If any of the connected spaces would contain a conflict marker, you don't lose the tile, but you may not use its ability. If you lose control of any of those connected spaces, return the advantage tile back to the map and retain its status, so it was already exhausted, it will be exhausted on the map. It will only get refreshed at the end of the turn. Conflict markers don't belong to any side. They can occupy political spaces in regions or markets. Each space can contain maximum 1 conflict marker. Spaces containing conflict markers may not be used for market connection, advantages, awards, prestige scoring, global demand eligibility, alliance, triggering conditions on ministry cards and event cards, and for final scoring. On the 6th turn after the American War of Independence, if there are any US flags on the map, these US political spaces become available. US flags are permanent and they cannot be removed by any way, and they count as friendly to French player during the final scoring. So that's how you play Imperial Struggle. If you have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below. I'll be happy to answer your questions. If you like the series, if you like the video, please subscribe and check out my other tutorials. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you next time.